Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, wellbeing and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal wellbeing.
Welcome to the 221st episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. November is all about parenting with equity and wellbeing in mind. So today we're going to be focusing on wellbeing, and to join me to do this is the brilliant Dr. Naomi Irvine. Dr. Naomi Irvine specialises in helping leaders improve their relationships and results in complex organisations through fierce conversations, gender empowerment, personal effectiveness, leadership development, and coaching and mentoring. Her services support organisations to maximise retention of valued staff members, attract a diverse workforce, build resilience and creativity, as well as promoting the advancement of underrepresented groups. She's trained in fierce conversations, an intervention to support organisational change. She delivers mandatory equalities training and bespoke away days for the third sector, as well as leadership development for emergent leaders in the higher education sector and knowledge transfer, particularly with research culture in STEM. She's had a career that spans many organisations, with a PhD from the University of Cambridge, followed by being a research associate and working at Nottingham Trent University and the University of Leicester. Now, she's the owner of Dr. Naomi Unlimited, and I'm delighted to have her on the show to talk more about parenting with wellbeing in mind as a professional who is running her own business. Naomi, a huge welcome to the show.
Layla, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this for weeks, and I'm delighted to be able to talk this through with you. Thank you for having me.
No, we're delighted that you're here, and I've just read out your bio, but I think it'd be great if you could tell listeners what you're working on at the moment.
So I help leaders to have better conversations about their leadership. And what's making a massive difference, what's really striking me at the moment, is that the conversations are changing all the time. So I'm doing much less around what it means to lead and the mechanics of leadership, and far more around the environment in which people are leading and the impact that their leadership culture or the organisational culture is having on them.
And I think that's so needed right now. And, what's the appetite for that at the moment? How are you finding those discussions? How receptive are people to that?
I think people are quite receptive because I work a lot with schools and universities. And especially in the university sector, people talk much more about research culture now. But what's interesting is that for years I've watched the term culture trip off the tongue, and people would use the term really passively. So they just go, oh, but that's culture, isn't it? As if it had nothing to do with them. So I've spent quite a bit of time with people just saying really gentle things like, what's this conversation telling you? What's all this information telling us? How does it relate to other things you're doing? How is this all fitting together? What's this bit for? What's that bit for? How's this affecting the way that you lead? So I find that with that approach, people can be very, very receptive. And I'm finding it's getting a lot more traction as I can point out to people quite quickly that the sorts of things that we're talking about are not a given. They are products or outcomes that culture is producing. And I find that once people start to see the significance of these throwaway comments, they can be very, very engaged in trying to use these kind of micro moments to turn things round.
And that's really interesting, that point around culture tripping off the tongue. Absolutely. And I'm thinking about your parenting journey so far and the culture change around that potentially for you as an individual. And it's a difficult thing to do, but how would you summarize your parenting journey so far, if you can, or in a particular aspect that you'd like to talk about?
Well, it's an interesting one because I wear different hats. So I'm going to try and speak about this in the round as far as I can. So I'm a mum, I'm a business owner, I'm a parent, I'm many, many different things. And I think that one of the things that's kind of struck me is that as I've become more experienced as a parent, the less I know about parenting, because I'm bringing up my kids to kind of be their own people. And I've got to be able to, I suppose, when they were tiny. So if I think about being a mum to little babies, it's very much about keeping them safe and making sure that their kind of physical needs are met, and that, when they cry, they get a cuddle, and that I hold their hand and I talk to them about different things around them. And they've got a very, very tight leash. Emotionally, there's not an awful lot of harm that can be done at that stage. They're not that rude. They do funny things. It's all very cute. And I know where they've gone to sleep. I know who they've talked to. I know what they've eaten. So there's, in that sense, one of the things about being a parent is that you might have heard this expression before. I was a great parent until I had kids. And I'm a great parent now until the next challenge. So for me, it's being on this trajectory of being a parent is almost, I would almost say it's like constantly humbling myself as I build my relationship with these people who are half me, half their dad, and 100% someone else. And kind of listening to them and having to remember that whatever worked yesterday might not work tomorrow, and just to keep going, and to remind myself that in and of itself is the outcome, is just to keep going. There's no such thing as perfection. I feel absolutely no pressure to get it right all the time, and some people might be quite shocked by that, because there are so many different ways that people will tell you to parent, and so many different ways that people judge other people's parenting. And I think that really, when I bring sort of distill it down, it's about just trying to constantly reflect and have confidence that I'm doing my best, and to look at the person in front of me and think, well, how are they doing? How's this all working between us? And so I suppose that's how I reconcile it day by day. And sometimes it's good, and sometimes it just isn't. But I think that humility for me is a huge part of how I try to negotiate the challenges.
I love the way you said, you're a best parent until you're a parent.
Yeah, and, brilliant. I was great at it before.
So am I, Naomi, and that's why I'm the fun auntie. I have them and I give them back, and that's what it's about.
Yes, and you're a trusted adult in somebody else's life, and that's really, really important. Kids have got to learn to trust all adults. They do.
That's a very interesting perspective. And thinking about then what does the term parenting with wellbeing mean? Parenting with wellbeing in mind mean to you?
That's interesting, and I've enjoyed thinking about that question in particular. So I think that for me, there's a mixture of how it is that I look after myself so that I can look after them. So that thinking on a fairly pragmatic level, what does day-to-day routine, care, comfort need to be in our home? What makes our home the place that's safe, reassuring, a place that we can all enjoy being in, that we retreat from a world that is complex and that they've got to learn to navigate. So it's first and foremost, it's about being able to kind of teach my children, or to talk to them about the fact that their well-being is something that they need to take active care of, and that it won't always be great and it won't always be awful. But the other sort of complexion for me in this is that I've got boys, and we know that that one of the things that gets me about watching parenting overall, and I said about judgment, and I can't pretend I don't silently watch and think, might not say that myself, and the care that one has to take rather than criticize somebody's parenting because it's so personal, is that people parent boys and girls differently. So one of the things I made an effort to do very, very early on was to think about the stereotypes that were going to come into their world, and the stereotypes that come into their friends' worlds, especially their friends who are female, because I watched them being parented very differently, and I felt that was a source of an awful lot that we could work with, and that we could talk about constructively to really understand what it means to care for another person. Because my little boy said to me one day, he said, boys don't have feelings. And he asserted this so confidently. And another parent looked up. We're in a park, and he looked at me and he said, where do you think you got that from? Which I was very glad another adult said that, because I've also seen people say, what's that fat lip now? You're training to be a little man. You're trained to be a little man. Let's get rid of that fat lip. And I thought, how dare you? But I thought, you don't know him. You don't know what's wrong with him. You don't know me. And yet you feel you can say that to somebody. So when this other parent in the park looked at me and said, I wonder where he got that from, my answer was, he got it from the world. He got it from everywhere. I said, but I'm really worried that he thinks that, because I'm worried that one day that might make him ill. There are some strong and silent stereotypes. There's, boys don't cry. There's, by contrast, seeing girls as over emotional, that you can see us setting ourselves up for a whole world of failure if we don't understand ourselves better, the stereotypes that have an impact on our kids' development, and then how it affects the way they relate to the world. So parenting with well-being, I suppose it's helping them to kind of question within reasonable boundaries and in an appropriate way, helping them to question the world that they're in now, with hopefully me as a trusted adult and other trusted adults, and then think, what world am I asking them to participate in and to observe and to create as they get older? And how does care for self and care for others be kind of a bedrock of the way that they negotiate the future relationships? So there's a bit of unlearning of baggage that we all have, and a bit of trying to just instill a little bit of questioning, things like, what makes you say that? Why do you think that, darling? Like, what if this is a feeling, and what if that's okay? It's nothing that's massively disruptive, but just enough to say to them in a way that they can make sense of, it doesn't need to be like this.
Mm. Yeah, that's very, very helpful. And then thinking about that, building on that point around how do you then talk to children about their well-being? So you said that's part of it, and looking after yourself. And I think many of us from our generation, Naomi, we've had particularly mothers, because of patriarchy, who haven't looked after themselves very well. And we've seen that as a role model. And that's not criticizing, that's not judgmental, but it kind of hits you at a particular age and you go, sugar, I don't want to do this for my kids or children around me, whether they are biological children or not. I think the other thing is there's lots of well-being industry stuff, and it's the glossy pamphlets, and it's the workbooks, and it's the coloring books, and I think that's part of a package. But for you, how what are the biggest challenges in talking about mental well-being with your children?
Well, it's funny you talked about the glossy pamphlets. Have you ever seen The Man That Has It All on Facebook?
No, I haven't.
It flips all the patronizing glossy stuff on its head. So how do I manage? I store a little bit of pineapple in my lip for the whole day, winning at life. And it's really quite funny, because it shows that the wellness, and there's nothing wrong with talking properly about well-being, an educated conversation about what it means and how we role model it. Nothing wrong with that at all. But actually, this is one of the things I'm quite firm on, is it that keeping life going is not all on me. And I'm all right with saying that. So and sometimes that can come across as quite harsh. So you talked about patriarchy, and the messages it sends us is that we treat boys get away with a lot. And I love my kids, and they're pretty competent little boys, but there's a world that's going to let them get away with a lot more. They'll be able to make more mistakes. They'll be able to not be judged for it. So as I hear myself sometimes talking about care, I feel like I sound quite harsh, because I'm saying, no, come on, you've got a job to do here. Let's look at how you can do it. My older one told me off for abdicating responsibility the other day, and I said I was very clear with you. This was not my responsibility to take. So I think that for me, it's about appropriate boundaries. It's also about respect for somebody else's capability. The funny sort of tension that we expect kids to regulate their emotions in a way that we never expect adults to do, and then on the flip side of that, we expect nothing of children where they're very good at doing stuff. My older son, there was one day, I can't remember how we were talking about it. I thought, this is a real live example. We're talking about dinner. So I said, I don't really fancy making anything fancy tonight. So we'll just, whatever it was, something easy. And he said, I'll cook. He with adult supervision, he can cook a meal. So it's about equipping kids with the skills to look after themselves. And the boundaries to express themselves as well, and getting that balance right. That's really important. So again, I'm very conscious of the gender stereotypes that I need to help my boys with their feelings, but I also have to help them with their competence, and to show them what it means to, be at home, to contribute to a household, to think about other people's needs in the world. So that for me is kind of role modeling well-being, is this bedrock of care and cooperation, really.
I really love that, because I've got someone else in my life, a very dear friend, and she does that. So her children do the washing up. She's got 2 boys. They do a lot of work, and then she holds space for the emotions. And I think that is the difference between growing up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yeah,
and growing up now. Because you're so right when you were saying about regulating your emotions. Flipping heck, that really pulled a chord for me, because that's definitely it. But then it's also, oh no, don't make your bed because you won't be capable. And the reverse is actually really needed.
It really is. Yeah, exactly. Like, come on, we make our beds up. Oh, I don't know how. Okay, let's break it down then, shall we? I'll show you. You grab that corner of the sheet and I'll do the other bit. I can't do it. Let's just have a crack at it then. Doesn't matter if it doesn't go right the first time. So it's that incremental thing. But yeah, when I think about feelings, I used to joke that I didn't really develop empathy till I was 26, and it was probably sooner. But we didn't talk about feelings. We couldn't name them really. Or far less the effect it was having. So, the phrase that really stands out for me at the moment is the body keeps the score. And I say that a lot to people. So that, I suppose, for me, there's that, coming back to how you take care of yourself. But yeah, with kids, telling them not to cry, or telling them, that some of the things are so demeaning, like acting like a baby, or what's that fat lip for? It's like, we don't do that well, actually, I suppose people do it to adults in different ways, but like, don't do that to a child. Let them. The world will not end because the child's unhappy. It would be catastrophic to deny them that experience when we could have done something about it. And they have to learn to get help. They have to learn to get what they need from that interaction. That's behaviour for children is communication. It's not another problem to be stuffed out at a really superficial level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that just there's so much in there. Thank you, Naomi. So helpful. And I think thinking about the workplace then, where people are bringing in their personal culture, they're working in an organizational culture, everyone's got different opinions about emotions, what's professional. And then a lot of the workforce, as we know, will be parents. That could be traditional parents, biological parents, adoptive parents, guardians, carers, etc. What do you think workplaces should be doing, given your work that you do on leadership, to understand the needs of parents in this area, especially around the wellbeing piece more?
I think it's an interesting one because I started working for myself 6 years ago as a parent of at that stage much younger children, and I was in a traditional nuclear family. I'm now a co-parent, self-employed co-parent with 2 older young children. So I suppose it's an interesting question to ask and to answer, because I stepped back from the workplace because I felt like there's a difference between a parent, I think, and being a mum in work. I think that's a very important distinction, because I felt that at the time I was in an employed capacity, I was carrying the baggage that, you've got to work like you don't have a family, and you've got to have a family like you don't have a job. And I felt that daily. So I remember I used to, if either of our children were ill, I used to make a point of saying, this is what we will be doing. I will do this bit and their dad will do the other. And that was quite an important part, that we understood each other's professional circumstances well enough to know that was how we could negotiate their care when they needed us at home. And I worked in an organisation where that could be done through annual leave, but it wasn't pleasant sometimes having to say to somebody, my child's sick. And the number of times I wish I'd said, what would you recommend then? Because I know that you have to have an employer who's all right with you taking leave at short notice, where you've got other members of staff that would be able to cover that day. But at the time, it felt to me like talking about the needs of parents in the workplace was about how to help mums manage their responsibilities rather than how do work and life merge. And another really quite sinister tone that came through in this was that what about the parents, or the mums in particular, whose spouses wouldn't facilitate, and that became another stick to beat them with, well, it's your fault for picking the wrong person, when actually we don't really know what it's like to be a parent until we start being a parent. So I think that's taken a kind of massive step back from the question you've asked, but I think it's to understand that our organisations are not neutral. And an awful lot of workplaces implicitly were set up to serve the needs of a single career family, when there was somebody else at home that could do everything else. So I think one of the first things we have to do is actually to talk about the fact that our organisations aren't neutral. And if we have parents, how do we facilitate productive, fulfilling working lives where people can maintain multiple commitments, which isn't actually just about being a parent. So I'm thinking about one of the universities I was familiar with a number of years ago, where they found that their flexible working practices were actually having a huge benefit on more senior members of staff who had elderly parents. So we can expand our definition of how we, I suppose, not just the parenting workforce, but the caring workforce, and start to think about something which is much more flexible, but also where we can talk about what it's like to be a parent. And I suppose in a sense, for me, it's a hugely galvanizing force. There's nothing that gets me going more than showing up to work and showing up for my clients to provide for my kids. Like it gets me out of bed. It absolutely does. And it doesn't matter what's been going on 10 minutes before, I've still got to show up and do it. But I feel very, very lucky that I've been able to negotiate a fulfilling professional portfolio and flexibility. I'd like to see far more conversations among managers, leaders, where we don't speak about it like the only way people are successful is because they either were able to get lots of expensive help, or because somebody else was doing it, so I almost see this flip side. It was a badge of honor for a while, and it's none of those things, because there's no such thing as having it all either. That was something that's a myth too, there's whatever it means for us to have a fulfilling professional life, and then there's what we do outside of it, and they're all valid. It's just about bringing everything to the table to try and understand who our colleagues are. And really, one of the best things that any leader can do is actually just to get to know their people. It's people who make the organization work. The tasks obviously need to be done, but it's the people and knowing people that's going to make the biggest difference.
Yeah, so beautifully put. And I think that point around workplaces are not neutral in so many senses, not for parents, not for race equity, not for gender equity, not for disability access. We could keep going. And listeners will have heard me say this. I go on and on about the Victoriana 9-to-5 system that we still have, where the man of the family, middle class, would go to an office job that was upper to middle class. Then they'd come back, there'd be someone in the house to give them the slippers. It could be the wife, and it would be a wife because, it wasn't possible to live with someone of the same sex, or it was transitioning or non-binary, and then the woman and the female staff would be in the kitchen cooking the dinner, and it would take a long time because that's the way things worked. And then they'd have their dinner, and then they'd be in front having go to the pub maybe, or be in front of the fire with a pipe. And actually that's really that kind of intrinsic culture seems to have been very pervasive, and they're not really that many workplaces, considering that we're in 2023, that are responding to the needs of parents. And that point around, and this is one of the reasons I did not want to have children, is because I just find the pressure on mothers so great, so immense, versus fathers. And I think if you've got two mothers, there's all the whole backlash that you have to deal with that. And I think if you're two fathers as well, there are challenges, but I do still feel it's different for women and the mental load. And I've got a really good friend, and she said to me, Layla, I tried to get so much gender equity in my relationship. I had a child and I've gone back to 1955.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She said it's incredible. She said you can try and try and try. And I've had several friends tell me this, but actually at the end of the day, I do feel like I've just gone retro and I didn't want to.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, there's two things that I want to say to that. One is if we think about the model of the mum doing all the nurturing and the caring, kids miss out then because they haven't had that balance of a relationship in front of them. So there's an imprint there of what who does what in a home. Which that's one thing I'm really keen to make sure that my kids see that I 50-50 co-parent. My children we're not together, but my children have a relationship with both parents. So there's there's what kind of presentation of life that has given us implicitly. But then the other part of it, just to think about the friend that you've just described, where you just gone retro, is that didn't happen by accident. And for me, and again, thinking especially about my boys, I would be looking to them to see and to be able for them to start the conversations with their partners about what fair looks like for our life in the future. So who is observing that? That didn't, things like maternal exhaustion, that's not inevitable. We can't talk about these things like they're inevitable. They're about choices. And it's about us being able to help people to have the right conversations about being overwhelmed, about all the work, the silent and invisible work it takes to make as my mum said to me when my kids were tiny, what it takes to make a day work, So I actually, there's a really funny TV show that I've been watching where the mum writes down every single task she's done over X number of years. So dusting lampshades and matching the lids off of Tupperware. All the trivial things, all the things that are seen as funny, but actually we don't function in a house where we can't find things. We don't function in clutter and dirt, or without nutrition. All of these things that we expect women to do, this about the mental load, why didn't you do it? Or where's my tea or whatever? I'm trivializing it now, but it's there and it's implicit in our lives. She made a note of every single thing that she had done and then just disappeared. And she had X number of books in the cupboard. And our husband found them. He wondered where she'd gone. He found them and he's looking at this thinking, I didn't know that lampshades needed dusting. He had no idea that all of this stuff had happened. And she worked out, I have had X number of million minutes of fruitless, free, invisible labour. I'm off to the woods. And off she went.
And you can totally see why, can't you?
Yeah.
And thinking about that point, you're an incredibly busy person. Like you said, you co-parent, you have your business, you have lots of other things that go on in your life. So how do you look after your own mental health, Naomi? And what are your top 3 tips?
The main thing is I talk to my friends. I'm going to sit in that moment for a minute. I think that the top 3 tips, I could tell you simple things like I love food. So I really enjoy cooking. I like eating well. I like cooking for people. I like all the normal social things. So all the things that feed the soul, and they'll be different for different people. I like being outside. I like being busy. In the moments where it's not great, I tell myself it won't last forever. But I think that the quality of our life is so dependent on the quality of our relationships. And I think that would be something that I would tell anybody to do, is to invest in the friendships they have, and lean on them for support in those difficult moments. And I do actually want to kind of bring that to life with another anecdote with one of my children. Is this idea of how it is I can show him how to do that now, so he's not worried about asking for help later. There was so I mentioned before about the fact that kids have big emotions and they've got to face massive things that they see out in the world, but they've got no real, they don't have the depth of experience that can help them to manage. So that's going to come out in any number of different ways. But my younger son said to me one day in the car, "We're going to die." And I really, really felt for him. And because obviously, one of the things about being a parent is you can't, or any responsible person, we can't pretend that bad things won't happen. And he got really, really upset. And the traffic was still enough. And I just said, look, I reached back, said, will you just hold my hand for a second? Tell me what it feels like to hold mummy's hand. Can you look around you? Can you see the sunshine? Can you see the trees? So these are all the things that are going on around us right now. And I said, darling, I can't pretend that bad things won't happen. But what I want you to remember is that right now you are safe and you're loved. And he said, but I don't want to be a bother. And I said, well, what do you mean, darling? And he said, well, what if I tell somebody and it upsets them? And I said, well, tell me what I'm doing right now. And he actually said, you're helping. And I thought, oh my word. I just thought, because it wasn't a lot for me to do. It was just to stop for a second and just be with him in that moment as I was trying to drive the car in bright autumn sunshine. And I remember it vividly because it was such a significant moment. But and I said, and remember, the people that love you will want to help you. And any moment that makes your life a little bit better is good for both of you. And I thought he might not remember that, or he might one day remember that that's something that we did. But that's the thing. So when I think about a moment where I've got to think, how do I take care of myself and how do I show them how to do it? It's those little moments of approach towards something that feels a little bit better than it did 5 minutes ago, without glossing over it or catastrophizing, really. It's just making it normal to say, not quite right at the moment.
Thank you. And I think that's so helpful for us as adults. So if you're doing that with children, often we forget the things that worked for us as children really work for us as adults as well. And some things you grow out of, like I think it's that there are situations where I know people on the neurodivergent spectrum might have cuddly toys with them, and that's totally understandable. For those of us not on the neurodivergent spectrum, we might not do that, but there are things that we probably forget that help us in childhood. So I think that's a really good reminder of that.
And to also ask him what works for him. What can I do right now to help you to feel better? When somebody's in need, then we've got a real fear sometimes about giving children latitude, like they're going to ask for the moon and the stars and a stick. But actually, sometimes they just want somebody to hold their hand or to tell you something.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. So Naomi, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your energy, your deep insights. If people want to know more about you and your work and they want to work with you, how should they contact you? And I will, of course, include these in the show notes.
You can find me on LinkedIn.
Great. And that's Dr. Naomi Irvine, isn't it?
Yes, Dr. Naomi Irvine. If you Google me, Naomi Irvine, I'm the first one on LinkedIn. That was the reason I called my business Naomi Irvine Limited, because I knew I could be found then. And you can find out about me there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Listeners, keep joining us for this season where we'll be talking more about equity in parenting and wellbeing. Until then, take care. And don't forget, you can always message me and tell me what you think of the episodes, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.